And I've decided that before revival can pretty much touch anybody around me, if I really wanted to touch them, it should originate within me. And I've been seeking it and praying for it and trusting God for it. And to be honest with you, there's some days that I feel desperate for it. Because sometimes I feel like we're desperate. And frankly, we are without the Lord. But I spent a good part of my life traveling around the country and doing this, sharing and telling folks about the love of the Lord. For a lot of years, for nearly 20 years, I traveled around with my dad and my brother. We had a group called the Bishops, and we sang around Tulsa fairly often. I made a lot of wonderful friends here. Back in 2001, when most everyone else in the world, and certainly in the United States, were all reeling from that day of September 11, 2001, about the same time my personal world was falling apart. And our family decided it was time for us to come off the road and no longer travel and sing. I went into a moment and went into a period of rebellion. To be honest with you, I wasn't at all angry with God, but I certainly was kind of mad at some of the people who were representing Him. And every now and again I would get in this conversation with God when I would bring myself to talk to Him, because I mostly tried to avoid Him for a long time. I'm telling you, for somebody who's been brought up in church all their life, it's tough to live a day and not have God affected one way or another.
Go on.
I can remember when I was trying my best to get away from God and everything that had anything to do with Him, I would be walking down the street and I would smell a scent that reminded me of Sister Louise Richardson, who was my first Sunday school teacher. And of course that led to a story, that led to a song, that led to a sermon, that led to an experience in an altar, and you just can't get away from those things. You can't get away from those things. So I'll say this, for any of you out in this congregation or who are viewing and listening who wonder if it's worth it on that Sunday morning to get them up and get them ready and get them here, and you're thinking, man, is it worth that struggle? Is it worth that effort? And is it worth that fight? And I'm telling you, yes it is. It most certainly is, because there may come a day when they're trying their best to run as far and fast as they can, that they'll remember those moments. They'll remember that time that God did something spectacular around them, or even in them, in that service. And as while I was trying my best to run from God and get away from God, that I ran square into Him. In, of all places, a bar. Because I was convinced that if there was a place that He wouldn't go, that would probably be it. And I did my research. I thought, I'm going to find the most despicable, notorious little place there is. The place where I'm sure God would never cross the threshold, and I'm going to go in there and I'm going to turn around and I'm going to look at Him and say, I did it. I escaped. There's a little bar downtown Lexington, Kentucky that has a green door right off the sidewalk. I remember being scared and nervous walking down the sidewalk toward that door. And I remember just before I pushed it open and went in, saying, God, I don't think You'll go in there, so I will. I opened the door and I went in, and I don't know what I was expecting, but it was dark, and it was loud, and it was crowded, and it was hot, and it was smoky. Surely God wouldn't be in a place like that. Although, to be honest with you, outside of the smoke, it sounded like a lot of church services I grew up in. I went in, and it wasn't very long at all that somebody, a guy walks up to me and he said, I know who you are. You're Kenny Bishop. Well, I did the only thing I knew to do. I lied. No. He said, well, you look like it. I went on in all terrified and scared and stayed a while and felt like I had done as much as a rebel could do. Left and planned to go back the next night, and I did. The next night I stood on that same spot on that sidewalk in front of that same green door, and before I went in, I said, God, I'm going to go in because I don't think You will. And I went in, and it was just the way it was the night before. And again, I hadn't been in there very long at all, and someone else, a totally different person, walked up to me and said, I know who you are. You're Kenny Bishop. And again, I lied. I kind of got anxious for the next weekend to roll around because I planned to go back. I'm not going to lie. I was enjoying my rebellion. The next weekend I stood on that same sidewalk in front of that same door. And I said, God, I'm going to go in there because I don't think you will. But if you will, and you don't want me in there, send somebody to let me know. I went in and was sort of relieved that I'd been in there for more than a handful of minutes and no one bothered to tell me who I was. Until I looked all the way across that little long narrow room and I saw a young man all the way at the other end. And I noticed him about the same time that he noticed me, and when he looked at me, he looked startled, and I thought, well, here we go. This is it. And he started walking toward me, and of course I started looking busy. I walked over to the bar and tried to start conversations with other people, and he got closer and closer and closer, and I noticed that as he pushed his way through all of those people and he got closer to me that there were tears in his eyes. And I thought, he knows who I am, and he's disappointed to find me here. And he looked at me and he put his hands on my shoulders and he said, I know who you are. And I was fully prepared to lie again. He said, but I need to tell you something. Just a few minutes ago, I was outside before I came in and I actually prayed and I said, God, I'm going to go in there. But if you don't want me in there, would you send somebody to bring me out? The same words that I'd said to God. I didn't know what to tell him because I certainly was not there to bring him out. And then he told me, he said, it was a lot of years ago when I was a little boy and you and your family came and you sang at my church. And I enjoyed it so much, and the Spirit of God spoke to me and dealt with me. And at the end of that concert, you gave us an opportunity to know Jesus. And he said, and I came forward and I accepted the Lord through your ministry. And he said, when I looked up and I saw you here in this place, I thought, God, you sent Kenny again. I didn't know what to say. What I really wanted to say was, kid, go. I'm through with that. I'm finished with that. But I couldn't. I broke down and I wept. He and I found a little place in that bar. We didn't leave. We stayed right there, and we found a little table all the way back toward the back, and we sat down in the corner, and he and I shared our stories. We talked about songs that we'd grown up singing in church. We talked about sermons that had impacted us and changed us. We talked about people in the church. We talked about all of the times that we were convinced, we knew beyond any doubt whatsoever that God had heard our prayers and moved. We talked about people that we knew, we both known had been healed. And we relived that God moment. And just like a prodigal in a pig pen, Jeremy and I came to ourselves that day. And without stepping out and finding any stained glass or steeples or robes or church songs or anything else, just steps off of the dance floor in that little nightclub, Jeremy and I held hands and wept and cried and asked Jesus to save us where we were, to find us where we were. It occurred to me later, oh, and by the way, Jeremy's loving singing in the choir and sharing his testimony and his story, and he and I worked together with our church to start a ministry that actually will reach out to the people who are in the places that Jeremy and I were. And one of the things that I learned is there are a whole lot of people going to be out somewhere dancing tonight who know our songs and know our sermons, and they've read the scripture that we trust, and they've known the God that we know, and they've walked with Him, and they've had intimate moments with Him and a sweet relationship with Him. But somewhere along the line, rebellion kicked in, or maybe it was abuse from a church, or maybe it was something else, but for some reason they've decided to turn and go the other way. And And we've decided that they're worth rescuing, so we go after them. And our church now has an incredible ministry where we reach out to them and we minister to them. But this is what I've learned. There is not a threshold that God will not cross.
Right.
There is not a room that He won't enter. And there's not a prayer that He won't hear in a place like that.
Come on.
And I've learned that prodigals do come home. And I've learned that as much as it woos us and soothes us and comforts us and calms us and convicts us,